my name is Beck and welcome to a spoiler-free and also spoiler review for the second Mistborn book, The Well of Ascension by Brandon Sanderson. Like I said, this is going to contain spoilers, but also a spoiler-free section. And currently we're going to talk about spoiler-free stuff, but if you haven't read the first book, then I'd highly recommend watching my review on that one instead, because this is going to heavily spoil the ending, regardless of whether it's the spoiler-free section or not. It's the natural sequel, so of course it's going to spoil where this takes off. So if you haven't read this book yet, please don't watch further because I don't want to spoil you. But this book is still following Vin and it's also following Elend, and now that the Lord Ruler has disappeared and they've killed him, it's taking place after that when they've got to effectively raise an empire out of the ashes. And so we deal with a war, like an impending war, and a siege between the different houses that are still in power. We see Elend trying to take up political responsibility, and then we also see Vin struggling a lot with her identity and her self-worth and her relationship. And there were a bunch of things that I had forgotten about this that I was reminded of that were incredible. There were a few things that I kind of looked at and went, not really something that I'd like seeing in a more modern fantasy work, but it's really the groundwork of where Sanderson started his career. So from that perspective, I was like, all right, I'll just move on. And then there were parts that were so cinematic, I wish that they were made into some kind of animated show or film, because I just want to see them on screen because they were that amazing. So I gave this a 5 stars after much deliberation, because the first half of this book I was quite familiar with already. It had a lot of setup and world building that I was already aware of because this was a reread for me. But that said, it still had a lot in here that I was really interested in, especially with the different characters' journeys, especially Sazed's, and how he's trying to develop and push the Scar on the outside of Luthadel into becoming more learned. So that felt very Mormonistic when he went on his kind of journey to convert people almost, and that's where the Mormon side of Sanderson's writing kind of came to fruition in here. And it's something that I didn't enjoy as much, but I still like Sazed as a character and I like different things about what was happening. So moving on from Sazed, I really loved the development of the different interrelationships in here, especially between Vin, Elend and the surrounding characters. And I think Sanderson's strength in here is, yes, the world building and the politics, but also realizing and building the deep characters he has set up a foundation for. So there were some moments in here that made me emotional, but not like over the top emotional. I didn't cry. I just had a particular kind of response to them, and I'll get to those in the spoiler section. But I still felt quite a lot when reading about this. I still was blindsided by a lot of stuff because I'd read this a while ago, and so I didn't remember a lot of the like smaller plot twists that were cataclysmic at the time, kind of ending chapters and parts of the book. I'd forgotten all of those things because I read all the books back to back on audio, and so I remember them as one big chunk rather than little separate moments like that, which I found very rewarding to revisit and relearn and reread. There was an entire character that I completely forgot about, and that was quite an integral character in this book. So when he was introduced, I was really floored, like, how did I forget him? So this was an incredible reread for me. I really enjoyed it, and I'm also surprised at the rate that I read this, because I read this again really quickly like the first book, and that surprises me given how long they are. So again, I'm happy with Sanderson's writing style. There were a few things thematically that I was not super keen on, like the way that gender was quite binary, but when it comes to Sanderson's background and religion and what he's writing and putting into a work of fiction and fantasy, I can kind of see the groundwork of where that would come from. So I'd go to a different author if I wanted different representation. So for me, that was just okay, and I could move past it, and I looked at the other things in the book instead, like the action and the risk and the tension and the characters and the world building. It was all so much fun to revisit. So now I want to talk about spoilers because I can't talk around them anymore. The character that I completely forgot about was Zayn, and this is Elend's half brother, I think, because Elend's father had different affairs and sexual assaults with all of these different women so that he could make his line more flush and make more mistings and mistborn from his offspring. Very messed up, but that made me forget completely about Zayn. So when this guy was introduced, there was also a mistborn that kind of led Vin along a little bit and was marketed as being insane when I know the reason that he's not insane. It was very intriguing to come across, and it was quite alarming too when he was just casually self-harming in front of his father and really like setting his father on edge. It was a very interesting power play, and it showed how like crazy he was, but it's something that I just forgot the darkness of, kind of like the beginning of the first book, how I forgot how dark it was with the description of the slavery. I forgot entirely about Zayn and the self-harming and how crazy he was. But that said, I also forgot how Vin started to question her relationship, because she was like, well, am I interested in Zayn or am I interested in Elend? I forgot that whole kind of love triangle. It was a very weak love triangle to me, and it frustrated me that Vin just didn't communicate to Elend. Even though I know she's quite a private character and private person, if you're with someone like she was with Elend for 2 years, why wouldn't you just talk to him? So that felt a little bit silly when it came to the plot, and Sanderson is usually quite good at navigating those kinds of things. So that bit frustrated me, because it felt like she didn't communicate just because the plot needed to function somehow with Zayn. So that was one of the little gripes I had. The other gripe I had when I talked about gender before and binary was when Sazed was talking to Tindwyl and he was saying that he's not quite a man, like he's not enough of a man. And that frustrated me as well, because obviously he is a man if he says he's a man, because you can have romance without necessarily it being sexual, and so it's just something that was overlooked for its time, I think. So those things, when Sazed was discussing his maleness and his gender, it wasn't done very well, to be honest, at least in my opinion, but it's something that I thought was the product of its time, and now Sanderson has grown very much as a writer and his character work has definitely increased. So those are two things that I was like, could have been done a little bit better, but I know that he's grown as a writer and this is one of his beginning works. So it's not necessarily that I could forgive it, but I could just move on from it. One of the characters in here, when he was introduced, Orasur, I was like, I do not remember him at all. I thought the Kandra had a different name. And then sure enough, that was one of the plot twists at the end that I completely forgot about, because Orasur was the spy and he was taken over by another Kandra called Tensoon. I forgot that entirely, and I kept thinking that the spy was one of the crew. I completely forgot. And I really liked the ending with Tensoon as well. I liked the discussion between Tensoon and Vin when it came to identity and growth and trust, and I think she did for him what Kelsier did for her in the previous book, and she made him question his own moral code. And I think that really came to a head at the ending when he was in a fight with Zayn and Vin, and they were going at it to the point where Vin might have died. He came through and he supported her because he gave her permission to, I guess, use her magic and her Mistborn ability to take him over, which is something that she did also with the Koloss, which is so cool. And I love this moment at the end when she overtook them while they were invading the city, and she had this kind of Koloss army to herself, and they raised her up to the wall to talk to this other nobleman who was hiding behind the wall with all of these other survivors. It was such a moment of clarity, because I could imagine visually exactly what everything was laid out like and how everything looked. And Sanderson really has a strength with that, in my opinion. He can really make you visualize what is going on, and he's very good at describing all the physicalities that come with being a Mistborn, because I can imagine it like I'm in Vin's head. I can imagine her doing all of the pushes and jumps and everything that she would do with her magic, which is really cool. There was also some really awesome foreshadowing in here. First of all, when Tensoon mentioned his religion and that said ruin and preservation, really awesome, because it was only like one line in the entire 600 or 700 pages, and I was like, I see what you did there, Sanderson, I see. And then another point was where Zayn and Vin were fighting as Mistborn and the Mists weren't helping them, and I was like, ooh, that is something I missed on my first read through. And then getting to the ending, I was upset when some of the crew died, and I think the way that they died were quite significant for their characters, like how Sazed noticed that, I think it was Ham or one of the others, and how he had that pendant that Sazed gave him the night before and he died with it around his neck. That was heartbreaking. And then the other one, Doxon, I think, and how you saw from his perspective that suddenly the world went black because he was being attacked, and so you knew that he'd passed away. So it was visually, again, very appealing and really easy to digest, but it didn't make me super upset, but it made me emotional. So Sanderson still wrote his characters with enough oomph that I was invested in them, which is why I've continued to read these and reread these. And then speaking more about the ending and the deaths of the characters, Tindwyl's death actually quite affected me on my first read through, but rereading it, it still did affect me, don't get me wrong. But when I read it the second time, I thought, this relationship isn't built up as deeply as I thought it was the first read through. It felt kind of surface level, to be honest, and it was over, a couple of days. So even though they had that past history of already knowing each other, of coming from the same culture and upbringing, it still felt very almost ephemeral and surface level, even though it had the potential and the capacity for becoming deeper than that. So it did upset me, it did invoke some kind of feeling, but I thought, you know what, it could have been built up a little bit stronger, but that's really just my personal opinion, and I don't think Sanderson's strength lies with romance, at least definitely not in this series. I did really like the relationship between Vin and Elend in particular scenarios, more so towards the ending. I felt the build up to it with the miscommunication quite frustrating, but I think they finally were honest with each other, and when that communication happened, that's when I was invested again. There was also one sneaky thing in here, actually. There were two things that I thought, oh, this will come into play in Era 2, and that is Tindwyl and the fact that she was a furochemist and she was part of the breeding program, so she has single-handedly helped bring furochemy back, and that's what's going to influence Era 2, which I found incredible. And then additionally, I didn't realize that Breeze's surname was Ladrian, because Waxilium Ladrian is the main character in the Wax and Wayne series, which is Era 2, and that's set several hundred years later. So it's cool to see Breeze's line continued, and that's why there are Allomancers in the Era 2 books, but also there are furochemists as well, and I believe that's probably from Tindwyl's intervention. And then lastly, about the very, very ending, I found things intriguing with the whole Mist Ray character that was just made of mist and the well. I think the lore in this world was very seamlessly interwoven, and it was very tricky and clever, and I think the world building again is a strength of Sanderson, and that's very evident in how Sazed came to reread the etching in steel and realize that they should have paid more attention to the first sentence, whereas anything in writing can be changed. And it was just complete chaos, and he renounced all religion then and there. He's done a 180 compared to what he used to be, and I think that's really important, to have each character have their own kind of growth and character arc, whether that's regressing or growing. And I think Elend and Vin both grew, and now Vin has come to understand herself, whereas Elend became a Mistborn at the end of this. So he's just starting a new chapter that is completely unknown to him. So I think this has got incredible foundation and setup for the last book, which I'm expecting to be absolutely incredible, because I remember my mouth hanging open when I was reading it the first time, and I can't wait to reread it again and revisit all of those amazing plot twists, because I also am really excited for Tensoon to come back, because he left in here because Vin let him go, and so I imagine he's going to come back at some point, but I don't know how and I don't remember. So I can't wait to see what I don't remember about the next book, because there were some real gems in here that I'm so happy to have reread and not remembered at all. So if you've read this book, let me know what your favorite scene was, because there were so many in here that I've probably forgotten to talk about. But thank you again so much for watching this video. I gave this 5 stars and I loved it. I'll come chat to you down in the comments, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye.